You ready?
Jack's here tonight, although it's just a team back, so they're fine. Ready.
We're good. All right, cool. Opening the meeting of the Montpelier-Roxbury Board of School Directors, December 12th, December 13th. At 6:32. So first order is public comment. I want to note we are having a second public comment after the budget presentation, so you're welcome to speak twice, but if you have planning to make comments on the budget and want to see it first, there will be an opportunity to comment after the budget. And just reiterating, public comment is a time when the board listens. It's very important to our decision-making process, and we take comments very seriously. Also really appreciate the time, effort, and thought that goes into comments. We know sometimes it can be difficult to get in front of a body like the board and talk. We really appreciate it and want to make it as welcoming as possible. But we are in listen only mode and we do not respond in real time, although we take the comments very seriously and try to get some sort of response out when appropriate. Do I have anyone who wants to go public comment now? And again, if you go now, you can go later, either in the room and if you're online, please use the raise hand function if you know how to use it. If not, just go off camera and signal to us that you would like to talk. So we have one person in the room. So please go ahead and take the chair in front of us and also announce your name for the folks that know. And for us too.
All right. Good evening, folks. Jim Eikenberry, Montpelier resident. Appreciate all of y'all are doing. I think a thankless task at times. So again, thank you for being here and doing what you do. Track by the numbers real quick. And for you all, you've seen it in the email, but I think the greater public needs to understand too. To my surprise, it turns out that track and field is our largest spring sport in our Montpelier-Roxbury school district. Didn't know that until yesterday afternoon. And so I think that's something that is important because some folks have said in the past, oh, only a few people use the track. So it's actually a very large sport. I saw your numbers there real quick. So if my math was good, with the 40 students that were in the track program last spring, that's 11% of the high school student body. And then with the 90 students in the middle school, that's 27% of the middle school body. And so the numbers are right again. Math is not my strong suit. 18% of the whole MRPS school district student students, they're in track and field. So if we can keep the funds set aside for the track renovation, please do. If the fiscal reality is such that you cannot do that, then please keep as much of that funds there as you can, especially to make immediate improvements to the track that can make it just safe and functional for its upcoming track season. I get that there's other reports coming out from consultants. I don't anticipate they're going to recommend relocating the high school. And so let's at least try to find a way to make it safe and functional for this upcoming season for our largest spring sport. And thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
Anyone else in the room? No? Online, I'm not seeing any hands. Oh, great. So next item is
Jim, could I just make a very quick announcement?
Sure.
Just, I wanted to lift up a couple of things that I have recognized in our school district, just very quickly, if I could. First, I wanted to say congratulations to our Montpelier-Roxbury Mask Theater program for an outstanding performance of You're in Town, and looking over to Lara because she was a key player on the stage, but there were many students who went into the company and crew, and I got a chance to see it on Friday and was so impressed at the talent and the commitment of those students. So I wanted to say that and also say thank you, Alara, and your fellow students for providing that entertainment for the community. That was a ton of fun. And then I also wanted to offer something that I didn't know existed until just recently. In my day job today, I had the pleasure and privilege of participating in a webinar in which several of our high school students were also there. The high school's healthy masculinity class was featured in this webinar I was in, and young men and their teacher, Joe Carroll, led a conversation among business leaders in our state about the expectations of masculinity in our society today and how to foster healthy relationships among themselves and also more broadly among everyone. And once again, I was just so impressed by these young people in our community. I just felt like it was worth using just a little bit of public comment time. Very grateful that they have this resource here at our high school, because to me, it seems like a really important part of what we are here to do, which is prepare them for life beyond our schools. So just wanted to acknowledge those two really great things happening in our schools.
Awesome. The consent agenda is essentially kind of small ministerial things that we need to approve, but don't require separate time. It helps us not be here till 10 every night. And if there is something that board members have questions about, they can pull that out for individual discussion. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Thank you, Scott. Took a while. Do you have a second?
Second, with the addition of the co-curricular. With the
addition of
co-curriculars.
With the addition of the co-curriculars, just to clarify? Yes. Do you have a second?
Second.
Any discussion or questions? All's in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Consent agenda passes. On to budget. So Christina, if you want to, I don't know how you guys want to
We're tag
set it
teaming.
physically,
We're
but
tag teaming this.
yeah, excellent.
Anna, I need the capacity to share my screen. Can you make me a co-host, please? I always feel weird talking to Anna. There we go. Can you text Jake to tell him we're in the cafeteria? Oh, I can, you just texted me.
I don't, that's just.
Just answer. Okay, so in my Orca friend, can you make the pictures disappear on the screen too?
From the computer.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so here is the draft budget. I just want to remind the board and everybody who's listening that this is the first draft. There will be 3 drafts to go through after feedback is given from the board. So this is the first draft. There are still lots of numbers that are assumptions that we'll talk about in here. There are some that are getting more and more real, like literally, what, an hour ago? We got new numbers that are not represented in here because we didn't have enough time to update the slideshow. So new numbers are coming in every single day. It is different from last Wednesday already, in a good way, in a better way. So we were able to add some revenue between last Wednesday and this Wednesday. So to no further ado, here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to do an overview just around the district, the glossary of terms, what are unknowns, and just a budget at a glance, because it's the thing everybody wants to get to. We have enrollment projections, we have staffing implications, expenses and revenues going through the capital plan, and then the tax rates, and then time for board discussion and public comments after the presentation. I think we'll ask the board to write down your questions and then save it to the end of the presentation.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so here's just some district information of the number of students we have and the number of total FTEs or full-time equivalents that we have in the school district. These numbers for the student count are from the October 1st student count. So it's just something to keep in mind. They might be slightly different now. However, these are from the October 1st student count. We do have 290 employees. 161 of them are faculty or teachers. Here's some demographic information. Anywhere you see less than 11, because N11 is our N size that we cannot report under. So if you see less than 11, then that means we have 0 to 11 kids in that category. And we can't report that exact number because it could be identifiable to a student. So we can't break purple laws here in this presentation. You'll notice here that our free and reduced numbers, the board, especially who have seen budget presentations before, those have drastically increased because the state is calculating that in a different way because of the universal free meals. So right now it's called direct certification through Medicaid forms. Is that correct, Christina?
Yeah.
Direct. So for other state subsidies, then they automatically qualify for free and reduced. So that enables us to not have parents having to report out and send us back forms. So that's a number now that's given to us by the state. So if you have a handout, you only have the odd pages. I apologize. I apologize for that little snafu.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's why we have the projection up here. So hopefully not the good stuff is missing. We tried, and you can't get it all on the screen. I tried to raise the screen, I couldn't. So I apologize. The context.
So that said, if people want to like scoot your
Yeah,
chairs
move
up
your chair.
closer,
It's fine.
go for
Get
it.
cozy.
Yeah.
It's fine. The context here, some budget themes. So we want, in any of our budgets, we want to support our theory of growth, which we'll talk about in a minute, while still being sensitive to the tax implications for our community. The statewide factors that we're dealing with is, of course, Act 127, something we've been talking about for quite some time now. That's the new pupil weighting law that will go into effect for FY25's budget. We have an anticipated dollar yield of $9,452. That is always going to be anticipated in budget presentations because it's set in law in May or June by the legislature, but the tax commissioner letter that came out on November 30th this year gives us that anticipated amount. The estimated common level appraisal, of course, what your house is worth versus what it's appraised at. That is still an assumption or an estimate at this time, but we have it on good authority that our estimates are pretty good. We have healthcare increases of 16.4%. That's a statewide bargaining number, so we have no influence over this. It's statewide, but that increases our health benefits by almost $400,000 in this budget. And then our local factors is that we do have a decreasing student enrollment. It's not decreasing precipitously, but it's decreasing. It's a downward trend. So some district drivers here. Our board worked very hard over the summer and in the early fall on three focus areas. One is academic achievement for all students. Another is safety, inclusion, and belonging for every member of our community, and a commitment to open communication with our community. So you'll see the budget will reflect particularly those first two indicators of board focus. I mentioned our theory of growth before. We've been working with this theory of growth for the last few years. So if you've been to budget meetings, this is not new. The traffic might be new because they haven't changed it a year or two ago. But we're working on the premise of four values in our system. We want to build limitless futures for every learner. That means when they graduate from our system, that they have any choice available to them that they want to go after. And in order to do that, we know that we need to have collective responsibility and collaborative practices because educating children is complicated. So no one person can do that on their own. We need to have formalized essential learning. So we're positive what it is that we need to teach students, and a student in one class does not get different content than a student that learning the same stuff in a different class with a different teacher. We want a timely system to enrich, intervene, and remediate, basically saying that any kid, the learning is the constant, not the time it takes to get that learning, but the learning is the constant around our formalized essential learning. And then we want high quality instruction in every single classroom. So typically in budget conversations, I break these four down to show where in the budget, particularly like money, the board is focusing on. and staffing and things like that. We're not adding any staff this year. However, you'll see our 4 pillars here around staffing, professional development, and leadership. And as we were sharing this presentation with our leadership team today, it was just massive snaps around the table for this chart. Last year, we couldn't put any links to show evidence of this work. And now it's absolutely full of links that people can click on to see exactly what we mean when we say multi-tiered system of support. The definitions are on our website under that link. So people can see it. They can see pictures of our intervention team and where they work and what their focus is. You can see definitions of tier 3 and tier 2 instruction with remediation and intervention. You can see our assessment plan. You can see our curriculum and how we develop it. All of that is up on our website now through a tremendous amount of work by the team in the back there. So I applaud their work most definitely and thank them profusely. You can also see links to the professional learning that will still be going on through FY25. So that is a budget implication. We pay for that, right? And in terms of, different tiers and that kind of thing, there are people and human resources that the board is committed in budget or in past budgets to ensure that we have the human resource capacity to make this happen. So a lot of development in these areas with evidence towards growth that people can click on. All right, so let's get to the budget in particular. Here's just a glossary of terms. When presenting a budget, somebody said the other day, I think I said this in the last meeting, that don't use buzzwords. It's nearly impossible to talk about education finance in Vermont without using buzzwords. So hopefully this is not an odd page. Hopefully you have this and can keep it. You have this one? Good. Okay, thanks, Tina. You can have this kind of dog-eared so you can refresh back to it. The general fund you'll see in our budget is the main operating fund of the school district. It's what we need in order to operate. The capital plan is a separate entity. Currently, it's being voted on as a separate article on town meeting day. We're actually checking to see if it has to be a separate article because we do a similar thing in terms of money transfer with food service, and that's not a separate article. So we're not sure why the capital fund is. So we're just checking on that. It will be a separate article for this year, but it's something that is different. The capital fund is for long-term planned facility needs. Education spending is our total budget less our non-tax revenues, such as federal and state grants like Title I and Title II, as well as locally generated revenues like tuition when a student is tuitioned into our schools and interest on any kind of account that we might have. Long-term weighted average daily membership, LTWADM. This is the new per pupil weights. We're probably going to call them weighted pupils during this presentation because that's a mouthful. So we will probably continue with weighted pupils if it's okay with the board. Although in the presentation, it says LTWADM. Okay. So that's our average daily membership and it's multiplied. This is the weights that we talk about. The property dollar yield is the estimated amount districts have to spend per pupil to have an equalized tax rate of $1. That's a mouthful. I'm still not quite sure that's exactly the best way to describe it, but that's what it is. If any of our 2 board members in the tax department want to make a go of layman's terms there, you're welcome to. But the bottom line is that in a good economy, there's a higher yield number and that lowers our tax rates. If the yield goes down, that increases our tax rates. And it's not something that we have control over in the district. It's set by law in the spring. We do have that anticipated property or dollar yield now. And then the common level appraisal is your appraised value on a property versus the market value. Higher market value equals CLA under 100% equals a higher tax rate. As close as the CLA is to 100% or over, that equals a lower tax rate. And again, this is not something that we have any control over. The dollar yield and the CLA, however, do drastically impact the school tax base. So each pupil, when we're talking about our weighted pupils, we're not talking about individual students in individual seats. What we're talking about is that each student depending on some identifying factors, what grade they're in, whether they are English language learner, whether they are living in poverty, they add different weights, which you see there in the long-term weighted average. You see the weights in parentheses after each category. This is what's changed in Act 127. The weights were much different now. So a student who has limited English proficiency at the elementary level that student is multiplied by 2.49, for instance. Budget unknowns still. The tax factors that we don't know are final LTW or weighted pupils. We still don't know that. We just got an updated number literally an hour ago before this presentation. It is not what's in this presentation, but we do have an updated one. It is still, we still don't believe it's correct. So we're still there, but we do have an updated one. It did go in the right direction at least. And our common level of appraisal, we're still using an estimate. The revenues, we don't know what our transportation aid is going to be at this point. And in terms of expenses, we still don't know what our Career Center 6th semester average is. And we are currently in negotiations with our AFSCME unit, which are custodians, technologists, and administrative assistants. So we don't know what the outcome of those contract negotiations will be. And Christina, I'm going to hand it over to you for budget at a glance.
Those of you that don't know me, I'm just the business manager.
Nice and loud so they can hear you behind you.
So since we last met, we had a lot of good news on the revenue side. We were looking at having to use a lot of fund balance, and we were able to reduce that because we increased our revenues on the special education side, and I'll walk through that with you. Budget at a glance, you're looking at 3 columns here. The first column is FY24, the final budget after the yield was set and after the CLA was adjusted for the reappraisal that was done in Montpelier. So in the second column is FY24 budget if Act 127 were in place. We needed to run through this exercise so we could compare apples to apples to get to the tax rate. So the column that we're going to look at is FY25 budget draft 1. Currently, our budget with the capital plan is $32,201,000. That is an 11.5% increase from the current year. That brings us to the long-term weighted average daily membership. So we're going to call that pupils. Currently, our pupils are 1,821, and that is the weighted version. And like Libby said, we just got new numbers on that an hour ago. So your next version, you'll see that number increase. That gives us an ed spending per pupil of $14,600. Currently, like Libby said, the dollar yield is set at $9,452. That would give us an equalized residential tax rate of $1.54. That's the number that's capped at 5%. So with that cap, we're looking at $1.33. And that's in red on the presentation online, if you'd like to see it.
This, Jen, just this budget at a glance, just to say it right now, even though the board sees an increase to the general budget than we showed you last Wednesday, we are under the 10% per pupil increase. We're currently hovering around 9% right now, which gives us a little wiggle room if some of these estimates come in not in our favor. So in terms of enrollment projections, the board can see several years of where we were to where we're going, and that our numbers are dropping slightly year to year. We've risen and then we've fallen from 2015. In terms of class sizes, this is something we wanted to point out to the board. We will be suggesting to the board to reduce in force a K-6 licensed teacher this budget season. You see that marked in green, where we currently have 5 4th grade teachers at Union Elementary School. So we are suggesting to the board, because of class sizes, to reduce a K-6 licensed teacher. What the board should not hear there is that we reduce a union elementary teacher because it's based on licensure category, not on school building. So it's a K-6 person there. We've done this in the past and typically that's solved through some sort of person deciding they're going to go to a different employer, typically that or a retirement, one of the two. So that's typically how that particular RIF is taken care of. If it's not that way, then it goes to seniority. I highlighted or had Christina highlight the K through 4 teachers at Union Elementary School for the 24-25 school year and the 25-26 school year, because this will be a place that the board will be looking at in future years to continually to make RIFs, because our class sizes should the enrollment trends continue the way they are currently going. Our class sizes at Union are getting very small. And your class size policy dictates where those classrooms should be. And there are considerable opportunities there to continue to look at our K-6 licensed teachers without breaking class size policy at all. So we have a lot of room to maneuver over the next years. And as we've pointed out in the past, 6 board meetings, this is not a 1-year challenge with Act 127, it's a 5-year challenge with Act 127. So this is a place where the board will probably be looking in the next few years. We just wanted to highlight it in this budget. This is the enrollment projections for Roxbury. In Montpelier, we have somebody who does projections for us. At Roxbury, we simply take the kids and move them down a year. We don't have that same kind of count. So if we have 6 third graders in 2022-23, we have 6 fourth graders in 23-24. There's nothing really scientific about it unless we gain or lose students, and we know we have at the October 1 count. And so we make adjustments with actual bodies and seats there. So this is just another way to show the enrollment on a line graph that does show the decreasing enrollment over time on the top line in red. And you can see when different historical dates that influence student enrollment happened for board members who haven't been here for a while. So in terms of this budget, what we are suggesting to the board in this draft, we had to make some additions. So ESSER funding is ending in September 2024. So we added 2.55 FTE in intervention paid for through ARP ESSER grant funding, which is ending. So we're adding those positions into the budget to help support our theory of growth around timely systems to intervene, remediate, and enrich. The RVS after school program, we are losing an after school grant that is currently paying for most of that program, not all of it, but most of it. And so we need to add 1.5 FTE to RVS after school. However, as Christina is going to note later on in the presentation, that we need to ask parents to pay for that service next year. And so there'll be a corresponding revenue for that piece. So it's not a budget add in terms of an expense. But it is going to be an addition. And social work, we've been paying for 1.0 FTE social work out of our Medicaid fund balance for several years now because our Medicaid fund balance was quite large. And we've used that up. So that social work position, in order to support students with social emotional learning, needs to be moved into the local budget. And then there's a new payroll tax from the legislature that's 0.44%. That needs to be added to our salaries and benefits page, or our salaries and benefits rather. In terms of reductions in force, we're suggesting to reduce AFSCME's support staff position, 1.0 FTE. That position is currently not filled. A K-6 licensure, as I talked about before, because of low enrollment, 1.0 FTE. The RVS pre-K position, which is 0.5 FTE because of low enrollment, that is currently unfilled as well. The RVS library media has a technology piece to it, which is 0.2. So currently it's a 0.6 position. 0.2 of it is dedicated to like a technology class that no other school has. And so we are suggesting reducing that position by just 0.2. not taking the library piece away, but take the technology piece away. And MHS Science, the district-wide sustainability position is 0.2 FTE. And when you reduce the district-wide sustainability, we have too many science teachers, so that would be a MHS Science rep of 0.2 FTE. Budget expenditures, Christina, take it.
Right, from here on out, we're gonna look at the total budget, so it's the third line on this page.
So expenses by school, this is another place where the board can see the costs starting to really skyrocket at Union Elementary School. And this is largely because of the very small class sizes. So this number, if we were to right size those classrooms over the next few years, that would bring it down to where Main Street Middle School and Montpelier High School is. There's room to maneuver there for Union Elementary School. That's one of the big differences between the Union Elementary School number and the Roxbury number. There isn't room to maneuver in the Roxbury number by reducing staff there without other drastic measures. So there's a little bit difference between those two numbers in how we are seeing them, but that Union number has drastically increased in my time here, certainly. And right now our class sizes are very small there.
Right now, we're gonna look at the expenses by program. It's a few different ways to look at expenses. You can look at it by category or by program. We're gonna start with program and then I'll walk through the category. Then we'll get into the revenue side where all the good news is. So general education, the proposed budget is an increase of 9.64. And what you're going to hear through all of this is it's a lot to do with the health insurance increases and contract negotiations. So in general education, we're looking at a 9% increase, mostly caused by health insurance premiums, contract negotiations, and the added ESSER positions. In special education, we're looking at a 29% increase, budget over budget. This is also health insurance, contract negotiations. We had to increase our special ed transportation and professional services. We're also looking at an increase to OT and PT service.
Which is occupational therapy and physical therapy.
Buzzwords. All right, our career center tuition, we're anticipating little change in the FTE there. Under student support, which is our nurse, guidance, social worker, and speech, we're looking at about an 18% increase, mostly due to health insurance and contract negotiations. Our staff support services, so this is library, tech, curriculum, and our professional development. We're looking at about an 8% increase here. The school board and superintendent area, we're looking at a decrease. We decreased professional development and we had a decrease in our legal services. Principal office and the special services administration, a small increase of 4%, mostly caused by health insurance. In the business office, there's an increase, of course, in health insurance. There's an increase in our audit contract. We go out to bid for that. And then added professional services. Under buildings and grounds, there's a small increase here, 2%. That's mostly caused by heating and electricity costs. Under safety, there's a decrease here. We had some one-time expenses in this current year that we won't need next year. In transportation, we have an increase. We have a new contract. I believe it's a 3-year contract. And under debt service, we're seeing a decrease there in our interest payments. Those are all the bonds that we have outstanding. And then the fund transfer to cover the anticipated food service deficit. The next slide shows you just a different way of looking at it, the percentages. And the next slide shows you a year-to-year comparison in those programs. This slide is expenses by category. So this breaks out salaries from each of those programs that we just talked about, and it breaks out the benefits of each of those programs. So overall salaries are increasing 10%. So this reflects our actual staffing that we know about. As of today, the benefits, so this is a 24% increase. We're increasing the HRA usage percentage. We were budgeting for 75% usage, and we're seeing that go up, so 85%. And we have the new payroll tax. Professional services, so this is the professional services, meaning paying someone to do something, i.e. like our legal contract and that sort of thing. That's going up by 6%. Our 504 and SPED requirements are increasing. And then there's just a normal year-to-year increase for services. Purchase services, there's a decrease. A lot of this is the building-based decreases that the principals put forward. Contracted services is a 14% increase, and this is also related to SPED requirements, and then normal year-to-year increases. This would be where our increase to transportation is. Supplies, technology, and books. Again, this is a decrease based on building-based budgets. Our equipment, there's a small increase of $16,000 for facility needs. And that is separate from what our capital plan does. There's a separate slide for that. And then our fund transfer to food service. This chart just shows you a different view of your salaries, benefits, professional services, how it makes up our total budget. And the next slide is a year-to-year comparison. And onto our revenues. So this is where we got a lot of good news over the last week since I've seen you. 2 weeks, a week, yesterday. Sorry. The top few rows is our tuition. So we can get tuition from towns that tuition out either elementary or high school. So we do see some of that. We also get private tuition. So parents that live, let's say, in our neighboring town, Berlin or Barry, and they want to send their child here, they can pay a private tuition. We also receive a small tuition for preschoolers that choose to come to our program after the universal pre-K bill was passed. So we're not going to see too much changes there. I don't anticipate. The next highlight here, I would go down to the local revenue, the after-school program that Libby referred to earlier. We're adding $100,000 there as parent payments to help supplement that program. The next highlight I would go to is the prior year surplus. You'll see $165,000 was added to the already committed $400,000. The next big number that you're seeing there is the ed spending grant. So this is the money made up from the ed fund and also property taxes. The highlighted piece online, Tech Center on behalf. This is based on the 6th semester average. So we're just waiting for some final information there. The next couple lines, the merger grant, the merger incentive grant, which used to be called the small schools grant. Montpelier-Roxbury still qualifies for that because they did merge. So you get that for as long as the legislature lets you. Let's see, the next piece that I bring your attention to is the SPED reimbursement, the extraordinary reimbursement. This is where we saw a big jump, an $80,000 jump, which helped us not have to cut as much as we were talking about last week. The next one I'll bring your attention to is the SPED census block grant. That went up $187,000. So again, that helped offset what we thought we needed to do on the expenditure side. Then going down, you'll see the IDEAB grant, and you'll see it says it matches grant expenses. So all of these grants are reimbursable grants. Whatever we spend, we get reimbursed. They do give us estimates of what we're going to be allocated each year, but we don't typically know that until about May. So we're putting in estimates here. This pie chart just shows you what's considered the education spending, how much of your revenues come from the ed fund and property taxes. The next slide is our capital plan. In FY25, we're planning, this is the $270,000 that you'll see on your tax rate calculation slides that we have kind of scattered all through this presentation. We're planning on doing UES windows and Main Street window replacement, each roughly $50,000 a piece. We are looking at some district-wide limited roof repair. One being this room.
Roof right above us.
Okay, the next slide you saw earlier. We're just gonna run through it again. To highlight the capped 5%. So we have our general budget at the top, 31 million, plus the capital plan that you vote on a separate article. So we're looking at a $32 million budget. Our offsetting revenues are 5.6 million. So that's the tuition, the interest, the special ed reimbursements. So that brings you to your education spending. That's the amount of money that you have to draw in from the ed fund and property taxes. Currently, our pupil count is 1,821. That number did go up an hour ago. So I look forward to presenting that to you at a later date. Bringing our ed spending per pupil to 14,600. We're using an estimate on the dollar yield that came out on the commissioner's letter of December 1st, which is 9,452. And not talking about the cap right now, that would bring you to an equalized residential tax rate of $1.54. But because we are capped at 5%, it will be $1.33, which compares to the first column, that is the FY24 final budget after the yield was set and after the CLA was adjusted for reappraisal. The common level of appraisal is still an estimate at this time. I'm not sure, I'm looking at Jill, I'm not sure when we'll hear that.
The statutory deadline is January 1st, so we're trying really hard to make it.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
That's okay. My whole life right now. She was ready for it.
So after January 1st, I think our next meeting is January 3rd. So this will look a lot different. Well, maybe not too much different. So the next slide, this is the impact. So we wanted to show if you live in Montpelier-Roxbury, well, we've seen this slide before. It used to say $100,000 homestead or 300,000, 200,000 and 300,000. We wanted to increase that to kind of the real picture. So we start out with a property value of $200,000. So currently your tax bill is $2,240. With this proposed budget, it would increase by $435 annually to bring you to $2,675. Is this an odd page? Oh boy. And then you can see for Roxbury, it'd be $130, $196 for a $300,000 house and $261 for your tax bill to $5,480. And just a little side note here, Montpelier has 1,895 homesteads, and about 66% of those homesteads pay property taxes based on income sensitivity. Roxbury has 222 homesteads, and about 63% qualify for income sensitivity. And this is based on 2022 data from the Vermont Department of Taxes website. Does anyone want to talk about my tax people? My tax people want to jump in. The next slide just shows historically the tax rates. The next slide is our non-residential tax rate calculation, and our budget does not have an impact on this rate. The CLA does, and this is for second homes, rental properties, commercial properties, this is what their tax rate looks like. I'm anticipating this probably to change. That's all I have.
So it's discussion and question time. And just a reminder to everybody, our upcoming meetings, we do have a meeting next Wednesday where a second draft will take feedback into consideration from the board and add in new numbers that we receive. So next Wednesday, the board will get the second draft of the presentation. January 3rd is budget public forum, which is kind of like a typical board meeting where a third draft will be presented. And then on the 17th, the board will need to vote to approve the budget that will, and the warning that goes to the voters. So Christina can get all of that ready in time for the town clerks. We do have a budget informational meeting on March 4th, and on March 5th is of course town meeting day where people vote. So open up to discussion.
Yes. So let's do to the board first, so then we can open it up to public comment. Questions or comments? Miriam?
I have a question. When we were going through the changes in staffing, you mentioned that we have too many science teachers. Can you clarify what that means?
I'm
So
sorry,
we have a,
we've got a blower here that's extremely loud. Could you speak?
yeah, so she asked about the science rep. So we have a district sustainability coordinator who does not currently teach classes for 0.2 of the contract. We're suggesting to the board to rip that position. 0.2 of that position, just 0.2 of that position. And based on student enrollment projections, that leaves too many FTE in the science department. So it becomes a 0.2 rip in the science department.
So I had the same question and we did get a letter about this too. It's easy to concur with RIFs that don't actually impact someone, or it's a vacant position or there's low enrollment. But that one really sticks out because that would be cutting an individual salary for someone that we already have. And that feels crummy.
There's a couple on there that would do that.
Okay.
That's not the only position that does that.
Yeah, and we definitely tried to minimize that to the extent possible, but we could not totally.
You guys are there. You know, everybody please speak up.
Oh, sorry. I said we tried to minimize the extent to which it impacted positions where people were occupying the positions, but we could not eliminate that. So, and that's a hard reality, but we did try to minimize it to the extent practicable.
I think it is important for us to remember that, obviously we all understand this, but just reminding us that all these cuts are going to have impacts, and especially any cuts in student facing positions. I mean, I think I'm just stating the obvious here, but teachers are not just givers of information. They're also lifelines for students a lot of the time, and really important to our lives in a lot of different ways. And especially if that,
They're still having a hard time hearing.
Yeah.
You really have to like.
maybe stand.
I don't know. I can shout.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We're not in the library. That's, I think.
Morgan. That one.
The teachers are
Impact on
direct
teachers.
instruction
Yeah.
with students and they're more than just
And
givers of information, I think.
Thank you. Especially if it's a science department position or any core classes, it's just that is going to have a real impact on students. And I think it's important that we remember that. I understand that we have to cut the budget, but
Yeah.
that one is particularly painful to my school experience. And I think my classmates, because even if we supposedly have too many science teachers, they're all people who make a real difference in students' lives on a daily basis.
Yeah, no, thank you, Miriam.
I had a related question about the 0.2s. There's 2.2 positions in the staffing cuts. And it sounds like they might both impact people who are already part-time. Is that,
Well, yeah, they do both impact already part-timers.
so I just wonder about the challenge of retaining people who are already part-time and then making an additional cut to that position, and if we're likely to retain those people or not, and if that was taken into consideration in the 0.2s. My other question is sort of like, I know that it's uncomfortable to talk about actual dollar amounts, but I'm wondering with that 0.4, the 0.2 at Roxbury and the 0.2 here, if that amount of money potentially could, I mean, we're going to be talking about unencumbering the track funds later, possibly if the board agreed to give more money towards the budget this year, if we could wait on those, like, could we offset the cuts to staffing by taking more money out of the fund balance? But I have no way of knowing like what those 0.2s represent in actual dollars.
So the 0.2s together, Christina can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's approximately $45,000.
45?
$45,000, yes. And when we were considering which places to reduce, one of the drivers was, does the position work towards our focus areas? So directly, these two did not. So that is two areas where we were looking at. The technology piece at RVS is not something that's needed at RVS. It's not a class that currently happens at RVS, is my understanding. I'm looking at Shannon just to make sure I don't say anything that's off.
So some teachers will call that position in for extra support, or maybe like a special subject, but at every other school, including UES, it's just part of the librarian's position as a library media specialist to also be integrating tech into a library lesson. So it's still the same subject, but it already happens, if that makes sense. So at this moment, we're a little redundant.
At Roxbury. The other thing I just like to remind the board that one of the things we cannot predict is what will happen with staffing, right? We just don't know.
Yeah.
Because there's too many unknowns that happen during hiring season. And as I've said a couple times the last couple of weeks, people surprise us all the time during staffing towards the spring and decisions they make. So you can't predict what one person is going to do and the influence that it has on that. I would also remind the board that this is not a 1-year problem, it's a 5-year problem. So while, yeah, I'm sure we could pull $40,000 from the fund balance, the board will be having to RIF positions over the next 5 years that do have people in them. And that is very hard to do. And believe me, I know that because I'm the person sitting across from them telling them this. So I understand that dilemma, and I understand how hard that is, more than anybody probably in this room. However, it is a reality that we are going to have to face in the next 5 years or so. And these are not bad teachers. These are wonderful teachers. This is no thought on the quality of the teacher at all. It's what we need to really focus in on across the next 5 years and this year. What are our goals? Do our positions match it? Are we overstaffed? Are we understaffed in those areas? And what are we going to do to make those decisions? We're going to have to make hard decisions. That's unavoidable right now. So yes, we can cover it with $40,000 somewhere else. We do not need the district-wide sustainability coordinator to reach our goals for the RVS technology position to reach our goals. And we have very low enrollment for the other two places.
And do you believe, like, if a position is 0.6 and now it's going to be 0.4, and we lose the person because it was cut down to that level, do you feel that you'd be able to replace, like, hire a 0.4 person? Or, like, is there a danger in losing a 0.4 science teacher at the high school? And would that then potentially put us into a problem where we don't have enough? I mean, speaking from
We
experience,
currently
like,
do not believe that would be a problem.
okay. Because like we've had trouble, like my son was in a Spanish class that was being taught by the TBLC and it was not a high quality experience. And so it worries me, you know, having, like, not being able to fill a position like that, because we're talking about 0.2 that feels like above and beyond, but if it turns into also losing a 0.4, that would be worrisome.
There are situations that we have with our FTE in our science department that does not make me worried about that.
Okay.
The RVS library media is something different. Perhaps we would have a struggle finding a 0.4 library teacher if that person were to quit, because if we have a open teaching position that's 1.0 at Roxbury, it's hard to fill. So that's neither here nor there really, because it's hard to hire for Roxbury regardless of what the FTE is.
Yeah.
I have a few that are just a little bit more of like, help us understand what we're looking at.
Yep.
So last week, the board was trying to give direction on how to get to about $800,000 worth of cuts / additional revenue sources. What is where are we at with that now? Just that bigger picture number? Because I don't think it's 800,000 anymore, given that we have these new revenue numbers.
Right, we didn't increase the budget by the 800,000 because the revenue came in higher.
Right. So what have we decreased our projected budget by?
From the version last week?
Yeah.
All right, do you want me to look that up and ask?
I can tell you before we got the revenue numbers, we were projecting that we needed 32 million in order to come in close, and we're $100,000 below that. But our numbers, it's hard to say, Mia, because our estimates change so much.
Right. Okay.
Right? And there's so many factors that have changed. So originally it was around 2 million and then it went to 800,000 and
Right.
then like Thursday of last week after our board meeting, because that's when our special education revenue came in, it went to 525. And so we're changing it as we work through the numbers, so in other words, we never did the whole accounting for the whole budget after we start getting these revenue numbers in. We
Right.
just start working with the numbers we have.
Right. So
And getting below the 10%
right.
per pupil.
So it's generally about 525,000 that we're cutting from what we would have originally needed to spend in FY
About
25. About that.
Yeah.
Okay. And would more cuts significantly reduce the tax rate from $1.33 and $1.37?
Hard to tell because we did increase our pupil count. So with that, we increased it by 12. Did I misunderstand the question?
Yeah, if we made
No.
more cuts to our general budget with the tax rate decrease.
Significantly.
I don't think so, because we're already, without the 5% cap, we're over that now. So we'd have to cut down
Jake's got it.
to get to 5%, right?
Yeah, it's an extremely weird year.
Yeah.
Not like we're used to. Even if we cut like $1 million, our tax rate is still gonna be $1.34
Okay.
because of the cap. We're
Right.
hitting the cap.
And if we fall under the 5%, don't we protection of the 5% going forward?
That's true.
Yes.
too.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's almost like a
Oh,
Goldilocks
this
of
the
below 10% per pupil from last year and above the 5% in order to be capped. It's like that Goldilocks area.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is there's no reason to cut more than we are currently projecting to cut.
It's quite a math.
Yeah. Yeah, it's because we're in I would,
what I'm inferring from what you're saying.
We are in the zone, yeah.
Yeah.
We're at 9%, about 9% per pupil increase.
Yeah.
Weighted pupil increase. And so, and we're still above the 5% for a tax rate increase, so we're capped at 5% for equalized tax rate increase.
Right.
so we're at 21% equalized residential tax rate without the cap. So somebody, the ed fund possibly, needs to make up that 15% difference.
Yeah.
16% difference.
Right.
If you want to speak to that.
Yeah, that's basically true. The other very weird thing this year, you know, our tax rates are going up about 22 cents, which is a lot. And in a normal time, you know, a community might see that and say, oh my gosh, this is terrible. You know, school board, please do something about this. But we're so far above the 5% cap that it's like, you know, you couldn't even get it down to something
Right.
smaller.
That's helpful. Thank you. My other follow-up question is on the new-ish revenue around special education that we learned about on Thursday. Is that one-time money, or is that something that we can anticipate over the course of the next 5 years?
Hey, Sue, come on up.
So our census block is, correct me if I'm wrong, our census block is based on our student count. So our special ed census block.
Right, it's based on the total number of students we have in the district, not the number of students that we have on IEPs.
Okay.
The extraordinary cost revenue that we have, that is based on any student that goes over $66,000. If their cost goes over that, once we're at that, any cost over $66,000, we get reimbursed at 90% or 95%.
So we get reimbursed at 95%, but what was the other one? Act 173 changed special ed funding across the board. And so the extraordinary reimbursement, like she said, anything over 66,000, we get reimbursed at 95%. But they have a second calculation that I cannot understand. The Agency of Education puts it together, and we're actually incentivized to spend more on special ed students that are outplaced or go over that $66,000. We get more money, more revenue for that.
Okay. And that's where these increases on our revenue slide 27 of 80,000 more and 187,000 more. Those are the new numbers that you received on Thursday. And so is that I guess what I'm trying to make sense of is one of the things that we've determined it's not very smart of us to do, since this is a 5, maybe more longer year situation we're in, is use one-time funds to handle ongoing costs. So what I just am trying to figure out is these new numbers, that newish $80,000 and $187,000. Can we expect that we're going to see that same amount in FY26 and FY roughly?
Not necessarily.
It's not a guarantee.
If those extraordinary students, if they age out of the program, if they don't need the services any longer, that could change our revenue drastically in those areas.
And I would say philosophically, I would love that number to go down, because that means that the systems that we're building in our schools are able to meet the needs of more kids. So that we're not needing to send them to independent schools that are, you know, therapeutic. Not to say that all of them will, but that as we continue to develop our systems in our schools, which I think are rocking it, quite frankly, I think that number, I hope that number of kids that then we're feeling like we don't have what we need in our schools will decrease, and then that would go down.
Okay. Thank you.
Jim, can I go? Yeah, I just have a context question on the 16% increase in healthcare costs, because it's so significant and it's also unavoidable. And I'd also, just based on the op-ed that you had shared, Jim, it sounds like that is somewhat like negotiable at the state level. So I feel like it would be helpful for folks to understand in terms of like why that's out of control and where the state can kind of come into that, or there can be advocacy around that. And if we can anticipate that will not be a consistently seen increase over time.
Well, I think, okay, so several years ago.
Yeah.
We used to negotiate directly with the union to provide healthcare directly. There was kind of a grand bargain struck by people at a higher pay grade than us all, that this would be done on a statewide level with all teachers. And the idea there was that if you had more people in the pool, there'd be leverage, you could bring prices down. That has just not been the case. Not even close to the case. And 16% is unfortunately kind of in the ballpark of the type of cost increases we've been seeing pretty much on a regular basis. So, so the state bargains for that. I mean, like, granted, healthcare costs are going up everywhere. I mean, we have a broken healthcare system that is like no mystery to anyone. So I think there are factors at the national scale that are driving that. That said, we don't know what it would be if we didn't have statewide bargaining, but certainly with statewide bargaining, it is a cost that is increasing at a vastly higher rate than inflation. And we can't control it. We're just stuck with it. And I think, seeing how focused Congress is on fixing our healthcare system, I'm expecting that we'll probably see it for a bit longer.
I have another question,
Yes.
just a different topic though, on the staffing piece. So what we were talking about just previously was, kind of losing existing teachers. And then we have situations where we have positions that are not currently filled. And I'm curious about the RVS pre-K or just like any unfilled position. That one in particular, I think we hear a lot in education, the importance of 0 to 5 and early education has the potential for lifelong impacts and more positive outcomes. So I'm curious if, and I know that there was a lot of active surveying done, that went out by Tina at RVS and the Roxbury community to kind of make that determination that we did not have the numbers for this coming year. And I'm curious, as I'm looking on the screen and I'm definitely seeing some parents of some young kids out in Roxbury that are going to be pre-K eligible upcoming. And is that something that will be kind of reviewed on an annual basis that could be changed in according to need? Regardless, of where that lies, and for RVS parents, Roxbury parents, how can they anticipate getting access to preschool education? Like, could they also come into the Montpelier pre-K program? I don't know kind of what its capacity is or how full that is, but I would love for those folks to know what their options might be if we move forward with this budget without a pre-K program at RVS.
So anybody can under Act 166.
Yeah.
So we pay tuition for a certain number of hours of pre-K that any Roxbury family can have us pay for. They just have to enroll with us. As can any Montpelier family, any family with a pre-K age student, their child does not need to go to the school. They can go to a different pre-K and get a certain number of hours to be paid for. And that's what had to happen this year because we couldn't hire, we didn't find somebody to fill that position. While RVS pre-K is in the budget right now in FY24, we had 0 applicants for that. So we around late April, early May, we started telling families about that so that they could find a position in a different pre-K, which there are a lot of them go to Northfield. They can certainly apply into Montpelier schools. There's usually a wait list there. But any family with a pre-K age student has money under Act 166 that we pay for. It's the pre-K tuition to go for a certain number of hours. So from the surveying of the community, we had about 4 families who said, yes, I'd like a spot for 4 kids. And then a few families who said, if you offer it full day every day, then I'm in. It's not a full day every day program. So that would be a drastic increase rather than a reduction.
So given Montpelier and Roxbury are in the same school district, would Roxbury be able to almost kind of get seniority in terms of, because it's right. I mean, first, the pre-K program in Montpelier satisfies the need in Montpelier.
It
I
doesn't
understand.
satisfy the need of Montpelier. The wait list is.
Okay, so there's a
Yeah.
significant wait list.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. And then in terms of that position, will kind of the community be resurveyed, each year to establish if there's a need for the
We
program?
certainly can. The challenge is that hiring.
Yeah.
I mean, and hiring high quality pre-K teachers across the state, regardless of
Yeah.
whether it's in public school or a private school, is a challenge right now.
Yep.
So that's the challenge. And if we promise something that we put it back in the budget and then we can't hire somebody by what date, May,
Yeah.
June, and then slots get closed up. So yes, we can do that. And it's a challenge
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
because I don't want to promise something that we can't deliver on.
Yep.
Because of a hire.
Can I just clarify on that all the one family.
Oh,
says
sorry.
Hours. Don't work.
Yeah.
So there is an interest, I get it, 8 to 11 is not that helpful.
Absolutely.
That's really the thing more than just.
Yep.
Can't freaking work.
Okay.
Thanks for that clarification.
Emma.
So I had to miss, the last meeting. But I did watch it. But I still wasn't 100% clear on, so when you had sent out the survey about like, what is the breakdown percentage wise, like that the board would want to signal to you for, cuts. And I'm just not sure, like, what happened in this budget proposal to like the busing or facilities or school-based budgets?
So the board gave us the direction not last week to not touch transportation. So that wasn't in there. Facilities is an interesting one because we decreased facilities by $100,000, and Andrew can probably speak to this better. But when Andrew and Christina went into the budget to discover, to find where they were going to find that money, they realized that there were things in Andrew's budget still that we were going to get insurance money from the flood, or we could get insurance money from the flood. So for instance, this basement stored a lot of furniture. And so we're going to get money for that furniture. So Andrew's furniture line could be reduced as a expenditure. However, we're getting reimbursed for it. So, we did decrease Andrew's budget by $100,000, except with the insurance, we get revenue for some of it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So that pretty much stayed the same. We decreased the amount of money we had in staffing and benefits. So at the board meeting last week, the board gave the direction to keep it at $400,000, to not go above it. And we are below that. We are below $400,000 right now. It's around 265,000, 300,000. It's around $300,000 right now for staffing and benefits. And then the board asked us to look at general school budgets and decrease the 3 Montpelier schools by $10,000. And then when we actually looked at the ratio for the Roxbury budget, we decided to decrease the Roxbury budget by $2,000 instead of the $5,000. And so just because of the ratio, the percentage of that cut from their budget. And so they've done that. The principals have done those cuts. So we followed the parameters. Even though revenue was coming in, we knew what the board was valuing and we decreased those cuts and kept some the same. Does that make sense? From that direction.
Yeah, and we were able to get revenue in, so we've gone from what, 800,000 to.
We can't hear you.
I can't hear you.
Oh, so I said, and we got revenue in, so we were phasing 800,000. So some of the cuts that, we were able to avoid some cuts.
And the other piece, sorry, Scott, before, just so I forgot this piece, the fund balance contribution, the board directed us to add an additional $200,000 so it'd be $600,000 total. And we reduced that based on the revenue coming in to 165 in addition to the 400,000. Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, related to what you were just talking about, maybe, given the parameters that the board sort of gave you at the end of last meeting, it seems like the fact that nothing was ultimately cut from the facilities, and we said we'd be fine with up to 100,000 being cut from facilities. We also said we'd be fine with up to another 200,000, and only 165 is coming additionally from the fund balance. It seems like there's some additional room there to not cut other things that we've already said that we're okay with. And then the other, yeah, so I'll stop there with that comment because it is related to what you were just talking about.
So you want to explain the facilities better? Because we did cut from facilities.
Yeah, we ended up putting 65,000 after Andrew and I reviewed each line, so we cut.
Essentially $65,000 we won't have to use, like we won't.
Right.
That we
Yeah.
won't.
You don't get insurance payment out.
Right.
And then
I'm not gonna say there won't be an emergency that comes up and we need a new boiler or something, but as far as what we're budgeting, yes,
What we're budgeting.
65,000.
No, but Scott's point stands that we prioritized buckets and it seems like we didn't reduce by those numbers completely, so some of these more dire cuts, seems like we left ourselves more wiggle room from when we left last week to today.
The only thing I'm gonna say about that, I agree, but, we have 4 more years to go. So as we're taking money out of that fund balance, it's gonna be money that won't be there for the next 4 years. So I don't know that we should just think because we've got, managed to finagle some things, we should go for it.
Yeah, exactly. I know it won't be there, but if we're using it to sustain or to keep one more year of something that's going to be sustained, we're going to have to deal with that expense at some point. Emma.
I agree with that sentiment that Lynn is saying, but I also feel like I agree with what Jake was saying, that this particular year is so bizarre and we're having to wrap our brain around, the new weighting and how much cuts we're going to have to make. And we've consistently kind of wanted to start strategizing about what the 5 years is going to look like, and then have been told and decided that we kind of can't because so many factors, including what the legislature might do to the weighting in the future. So in a way, if we're going to be a little more generous with fund balance, I'd rather do it this year. I feel like that buys us a little time to be more strategic in the following 4 years. And to wait to see what happens with the legislature in the actual Act 127. Especially if I think what the point that Scott's trying to make is I'm seeing $35,000 in savings of what we had indicated for facilities and a $35,000 savings from what we had indicated for fund balance. That equals 70, and that more than takes care of the, and I'm not, these are sort of building level decisions that you need to make, but I would feel comfortable with offsetting those 2.2s if that meant retention and that sort of thing. And that was better overall. The ultimate decision, I feel like, ends up being up to the administration and like what makes sense for the building. But it's something to consider.
Yeah.
I would just say the thing, Emma, you didn't mention is we also reduced, or Libby in this draft budget also reduced. The board had directed $400,000 of salary cuts and we're now at 300,000. So there was a reduction of that as well. So if we're talking about where did we apply those savings? It was on salaries, fund balance, and facilities. The schools are the ones who we are basically saying, sorry, principals, you still have to make all of the cuts we've asked you to make.
Which even that, to me, like the school budgets, I don't know that much about the school budgets, but it's come up in the past around field trips and equity and, graduation and moving on ceremonies. And it did sound quite generous, the numbers that Libby threw out at the last meeting. But I've also been part of conversations where I was surprised at, how little money they had for certain things at the school. So like that was actually a category that I wasn't that excited to cut, because all the things that Libby listed that were being spent out of that budget directly impacted student experience, which is what we indicated we are not interested in impacting. So.
Right. So I wouldn't be interested in continuing to cut 35 30,000 or 32,000 every year from our school budgets, for example.
Yeah.
But maybe that's the thing we have to do this year in this super weird year.
And then, you know, this is the first of several super weird years. So, yeah, and there are no guarantees that this law is going to change one bit in the next 5 years. And I think with Phil Scott as governor, it drops really close to single digits.
Right. And then I
Right.
wanted to add something too.
I sort of agree with them. I mean, we went from catastrophic red alert to it's, you know, the numbers have only been trending in one direction. That's my first just thing that I want to say. I also want to talk about briefly the $100,000 of revenue for the after-school program at RBS. I don't want to get too far into the numbers because when I do the math, there's, you know, I don't know exactly what it's going to come out as, but I would guess that you would have to sort of set a tuition and then people would either opt in or opt out. What happens if the tuition scares half of the expected people? Do you eat it? Do we eat it? Or does it get canceled? Or how would that work? Like, there's not, like, people aren't paying anything now. There's not a great, you know, hunger for tuition for after school program in Roxbury, as one might imagine. And so if people don't opt in, what happens?
I think we'd have to look at, because we've thought about that. And we'd have to look at the number of kids we have and then make a determination of whether it's worthwhile. I think the district would, to use your words, eat a certain factor. But if we're servicing 3 children, then probably not the rest of it, you know, but if we're servicing 15, that's half of Roxbury. So that would be something that we'd probably look at to use fund balance money to cover the costs.
Can I just add?
Yeah.
We looked at what Union Elementary is paying, what their parents are paying, and that's what we kind of used as a model for Roxbury's program.
Does Union have a sort of a scholarship model as well, or a way in which some families who can help some families who can't, or other ways to come up with
Part
sort of
2 is
creative sources of revenue?
Part 2 is what's it called, Kristen?
License program.
A license program, so it has their stars. And so they can collect subsidy from the state. Roxbury is not that, nor has it ever been that.
But is there? Well, I would hope that there would be a good discussion in case there are ways to come up with ways.
You mean something like a sliding scale?
Well, no, more like, you know, I mean, some people might pay more, like, you know, like sometimes some people pay more because they know it's gonna help somebody else. And if there's a little bit of discussion, just to feel out whether there was some way to sort of work through things there. I don't know how complicated that would be, or whether, you know, I know it would be worth the time, your time, from the perspective of Roxbury families. I don't know how much time you have, so I'm just kind of putting that up there.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add a piece to the, you know, thinking beyond this year, that the new weights that were applied in Act 127 certainly do have an impact, but not as significant as I look at slide 30 from the presentation as the drop in the dollar yield from FY24 to FY25. And that is also something that we can anticipate will be dropping a whole heck of a lot. And that does also get then calculated in for us to figure out the tax rate. So anyway, it's just another thing for us to be considering when we think about not just cuts we're going to have to make this year, but in future years.
Jake?
Actually, because there's so many more pupils in the system, that's why the yield dropped so much this year. But from now on, it's going to be normal movement of the yield. It's not going to continue to plummet by
$6,000 every year.
Right. It's
That's
a one-time
good.
thing.
That's good, because
However,
that would
we
last a
don't-
year and a
I
half.
don't necessarily know that, sorry, Mia, if the education fund, because nobody's talking about how much of the education fund is gonna be used by these budgets that are being passed statewide. And if the education fund is lower, the yield needs to follow.
Yes, but this massive plummeting.
You're right, it
is
might not be
from
as massive,
having
right?
50% more kids in the
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Act 127 added 50% more kids in the total Vermont system.
as far as the math
Yeah,
goes.
question
far as
for
the
Jane.
Weighted,
People and
weighted.
people.
Weighted pupils, right?
Yeah.
That-
We did not get 50% more students.
I
To the state of
I understand, but I
I know.
wasn't sure whether or not it turned out to add sort of revenue overall, or whether it just didn't, you know what I mean?
What-
So at least towns are seeing, some places are seeing a lot of help, and that.
Yeah.
I will,
Feel good.
I will tell you, Brett, though, that they're not. So a lot, and this goes beyond our budget, and it may not be the best place to talk about it right now, but the superintendents who are from advantage districts, the opposite of us, are not able to add a lot to their budget for two reasons. One, the governor's messaging. So they're generally in more conservative towns. And if the governor says schools are are spending too much money, they believe it. And so they're worried about every single one of them are worried about their budgets going down because of governor's messaging. And then the second thing is because they're worried about the education fund. And so they're worried that if the education fund, if the legislature doesn't do something about the education fund and the dollar yield continues to drop, precipitously or not, and whether this is a founded worry or just a worry of superintendents, then they will have they'll reach a cliff in 5 years, just like us.
Yeah, and another thing is, I understand the education fund is that because of the 5% cap, what the education fund is doing is it's shifting to the advantage districts, but then it's also having to backfill what the taxpayers in the disadvantaged districts are getting covered via the cap. So it's getting, its normal expenditure, and then it's getting sucked off of by the disadvantaged districts to make up for it, which means it's being spread thinner.
Is there any indication that the Superintendent Association is going to have an opportunity to address the Education Committee and legislative session?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah,
Okay.
we're lobbying. Yeah,
Okay.
yes, yes, we are lobbying. The first task is to get everybody who are in important seats to understand the educational finance system fully, which I don't believe is happening.
Maybe there'll be a huge boom in sports betting revenue.
That's right. Fill that in.
Yeah.
I heard that on a VPR this morning.
January 11th.
I just think.
Dang it.
How are we feeling? How are we feeling about public comment? Do we want more board discussion? Are we ready to open it up to the public?
I've got a
Scott.
hopefully a quick question or comment. So the equalized residential tax rate, right? That's the thing that we don't want to go over 10% increase.
No,
You're close. The pew purple spend.
For people spending.
That's what we don't.
This one.
Yeah.
1,600
Per pupil.
compared to this. That one
Okay.
compared to that one, we're under 10.
And right now, you said we're somewhere around.
we're hovering 9% increase.
Why wouldn't we make it closer to 0.99?
Yeah, we thought we had that originally. Christina and I were at a conference with superintendents and business managers from across the state last Monday. And one of the themes that we heard that honestly, the two of us hadn't thought about yet was that because a lot of these numbers are predictions and estimates, they could go the opposite. They're going in the right way right now, but they could very well go in a different direction. And so this leaves us some wiggle room. So we don't come back to you on January 3rd and say, ooh,
Oops.
we got some bad numbers and we have to figure out, and we need to make these additional cuts. So staying around 9% gives us a comfort.
For now.
For now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So on March 5th, we're not gonna be at 9%, we're gonna be somewhere close to.
We don't know. We could.
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, the thing is, if you're at 0.99%, you give yourself absolutely no margin for error in case something tweaks up. If you're at 9%, then a few things could tweak up and you're still not having to be like, okay, we've got to make cuts we weren't planning.
But we have time before we submit the budget to the town to
What?
shift that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, what we pass on January 7th is what we pass. I mean, some of these 17th, some of these numbers aren't going to be totally final until
June.
June.
Right. Gotcha.
Brett.
I was gonna suggest a list of things that we pop in, but if we don't know until June, doesn't matter. You can't play with it. I was just thinking like, if you get to a place where we have, 90%, 95% confidence in the numbers that we have, and there's room for a 0.2 science teacher, can it go in at the last minute? Can there be some things that kind of pop in at the last minute, but not if you won't know for sure until June because the budget's well cooked?
Right, so by statute, we have to have the budget presented to voters 30 days before town meeting. So on the warning, all your voters are seeing the ballot language, and that's what they're voting on in March. So you can't change anything. I mean, of course, you can say we want to hire this, or we need to hire this person, or whatever.
Within the budget.
Make adjustments to the budget. You can adjust the budget. You can overspend the budget or underspend the budget, but you can't make a change to those numbers. Because they need to go to the town clerks, so then you can get your tax bill in July.
So. But there is. So you could add things.
You could
After the
potentially,
budget was done, you could say, actually, we can afford this 0.2 science teacher position or FTE, whatever it is.
I mean, you have to find a revenue source for it, which oftentimes is like the reserve fund for a year or, yeah. So you can't just pass a budget that's for 30 million and be like, okay, we're going to spend 36 million. Let's go, let's go crazy.
But like the 0.5 pre-K position that has been unfilled because it's not operating, that's been going into the general fund. Is that correct?
And budgeted.
Unbudgeted money that's not spent ends up in the general fund.
Exactly. Yeah. So if we budget for an expenditure and, say several staff positions opt out of benefits because they're going with a spouse or partner's benefits. And that saves us a bunch of money that we budgeted for, that would go into the reserve fund.
Is it too much to ask of you? It's too much to ask of you guys.
The other thing to think about, think of your budget is if you are underspending in this area, you might be overspending in facilities because the roof had to get fixed.
Yeah.
So if your kitchen's on fire, you're not going to redecorate your living room. And so that's how I always think of a budget, is your house, right? So you might gain some and you lose some, and that's why I provide you with quarterly reports so we can see where those changes are happening.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Public comment? Great. So let's do it. I know we have several people in the room. My guess is at least a few of you want to say something, and we have a healthy number of folks online too. Can people in the room just raise their hand if they want to speak? Only 3? Is that it? People on virtual, on Zoom, could you do the raise hand function if you want to speak, and if you don't know where that is, it's down at the bottom of your bar, I think under reactions. Either raise your hand or just wave. I've seen 0 online. Is that the actual case? Okay. 3 people, try to keep it to a minute or 2. I'm not going to keep time. But if you could try to keep it to a, short, but doesn't have to be terribly short, that would be fantastic. And again, if anyone online changes their mind, just go ahead and raise the hand function, and when the room changes their mind, you can obviously step up. So whoever wants to go first, please do.
I am Morgan Lloyd. I teach fourth grade at Union Elementary School and I live in Montpelier. I have kids at the high school, 2 in the high school. And I pay taxes here. I have a quick question and then a comment to share. My question is whether increasing the number of students who pay tuition to attend school in the district is a viable way to influence the budget, either by increasing enrollment or increasing revenue.
It is most definitely a viable way to increase revenue. And one of the places we're looking at it is to get more exchange students, international exchange students who pay tuition. So there's 2 different kinds of international students. Some people, it depends on the visa they're on. So we want to get the ones that pay tuition.
My thoughts exactly. And so my other comment is for the board, as we looked at, for me, I forget what page it's on, looking at future reductions at Union Elementary School because of low class size. There was a slide that showed that per pupil spending is up at Union, maybe drastically because of smaller class sizes. And I just want to ask the board to consider the really essential foundational skills in literacy and math and social emotional learning, like how to get along in this world with other humans that kids are gaining in those early years. And I really feel like class size does significantly impact a teacher's ability to give individual attention to students, to respond to students as individuals and not just as a class that needs to be managed, to meet with small groups, to work on those foundational skills. I don't know if I'm old enough to say, or if I've been doing this long enough to see a trend, but in the roughly 17 years that I've been teaching, I don't see the social emotional needs, or let me just put it this way. I see needs only increasing over the years. And I think that post-pandemic and post-flood and in our current economy where many people are not as well off as they might like to be, and maybe there are health or mental health issues that are sort of community-wide, I think that we can probably anticipate that kids are going to continue to struggle and need those supports. And I think our schools are doing a fantastic job right now meeting those needs with multi-tiered systems of support and social workers and social emotional learning staff. But I feel nervous when I see those positions targeted for reductions in future years. I don't need class sizes to be like 12 to 15, but there's a big difference between 16 and 20. And then another big difference between 20 and 23 or 24. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Morgan.
Morgan. Yeah, and I do want to say one thing that we are not considering, which I know other districts in our position are considering, changing our class size policy. I mean, I think the numbers we're looking at, the numbers we're looking at UES is probably a discussion we would be having even if we weren't in the budget situation we are, just because they're, the classes are getting, they're projected to be at the very low end of what our policy suggests, and kind of well below kind of the optimal. We're not at a
variety of needs that are stretching teachers beyond capacity. And I'm hoping you can continue to think about that when you're talking about cuts. And I think that, like it or not, we're in a moment where it's not just the exceptional content instructional delivery, and that's already been said. Thank you for acknowledging that. It's not just literacy or numeracy or any other knowledge domains that we're valuing as a district. It's a sense of belonging, meaning, safety, community. And I think for students to know in their hearts that in a world that's becoming more volatile, accelerating, uncertain, and changing, that the teachers are preparing them for that in a way that they feel like can influence that world and have an impact for the better. And I think that takes a whole lot of support and guidance. In other words, maybe more personnel, not less. And so I just invite everybody to be thinking about that as we move forward for the next few budget cycles. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe.
Twice, I know, sorry. You're Mike and Barry Montpelier, still supporting the track, but just more on what Morgan had said. I was like, well, do we increase numbers? Do we increase revenue? Is there almost like, do we need 20 more students and then whatever that equivalent is, or what's that number? Do we have a target so we can maybe keep the staff that we want and the budget that we want and be the school we want to be? and then see if we can partner with the city on that and be part of the greater housing crisis discussion, because I think that's a really big part of it. I have so many friends who would love to live in Montpelier, but they can't. So then they're in the U32 district, they're in the Berry district. If we could find a way, so if we could be part of that larger discussion and stop our trend going down and get it to level or maybe even go up a little bit, maybe that could help so that years, the 4 more years that we're, you know, worried about, rightfully, maybe we can find a way to have that be not so bad. So love for us to try to crack that down. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah, and thanks for noting that a lot of the trends we're seeing are trends beyond our control, and, you know, including, you know, obviously housing has a lot to do with it. You know, the city just went through a flood, you know, the city's going to be asking a lot of our taxpayers as well. I don't know who's moving to the U32 district because their numbers are plummeting as well.
More so than ours.
More so than ours by a considerable amount. I mean, like Rumney's projected numbers, I think for a year or two, are Rumney and Doty's, or Rumney's projected numbers for like this year or for like the next couple of years is something like 2/3 of what it was. Yeah, so it's, yeah,
We are not in that.
we are not in that position. So,
But I also will say that I've thought a lot about the flood throws a curveball,
Yeah.
right? So I don't know what our enrollment's gonna do. Are people gonna see Montpelier as an opportunity? And when some leave, some come in as an opportunity for a different start with a new business where there's plenty of space for businesses right now, right? Are people gonna leave because of the flood and because of maybe a lack of opportunity or because of the cost of living or the lack of housing? I don't know what that's gonna be.
Yeah.
We're not in just like we're in a wacky budget year, like Jake said. It's very hard to make a prediction about the city, the town in the future in the next 5 years and how that will influence us. I
Yeah.
don't know.
yeah, no, and we also, I mean, I'm very cognizant of not getting into a rolling situation where, you know, we want to bring more families to Montpelier with kids who can enter our system. If the story about Montpelier is that our tax rates are going like this and our school budgets are going like this, you know, pay more, get less is not a come move to Montpelier story. And we want to do all we can to avoid that. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I wasn't planning on speaking, but I don't want to regret not speaking. So I'm Allison Waring. I'm a science teacher at MHS. I'm also a Montpelier resident, own a house here. I just want you to think about how much money you may or may not gain by cutting 0.2 from the science department. It's a little bit of, as Joe said, a wonky situation where I'm low man on totem pole. I make less per FTE than everybody else in the science department. So if you cut 0.2 from my position, you're left with 0.4 that could be covered by other people in the science department, but they, based on their seniority, make more than me per FTE. So it potentially could be that you actually end up spending more money in the science department by cutting 0.2 from my position. So I would ask you to think about if the board doesn't think a district sustainability position is a valid expense, what could we do with that funding to benefit students? Are there more creative classes that we could offer in the science department that would increase student engagement? I've taught a course that has been grant funded for 2 years here. So I've been paid by a grant instead of the school district that the school district hasn't wanted to pick up as a paid position. It's the river class, all about rivers, very pertinent to Montpelier students. Or it's been talked about lots that our science classes aren't accessible to a certain population of our students. There are students that need modified, lots that our science classes aren't accessible to a certain that we can't really provide within general education classroom. Is there a way that we could provide an introductory science class to those students that need something different than what we're offering right now? Because those students are basically being passed through the system. Right, so I would ask you to think about, if we don't need a district sustainability person, what might we need that could help our students?
Thank
you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Allison, sorry. Nathan.
My name is Nathan Suter. I live in Montpelier. I have 2 kids in the district. It's very hard to follow Allison. That's where it hits home. Thank you. Thank you, as always, to the board for being so thoughtful, and for Libby and your team for being so thoughtful as you go through this. I just a few detailed questions. When we talk about taxes, property taxes in our city that are driven by education spending, and we know that 66% of our households are income sensitized, I was realizing that I shouldn't assume that that just means their property taxes. I say there because I'm not income sensitized. That their property taxes stay flat no matter what we do, right? So I would love Jake or somebody who understands the tax structure. Love to understand sort of. I'm assuming that those numbers change in different ways, but it'd be nice to have even more precision on that. I don't know if that anyway, because I think when we have conversations in our community and we say we want to invest in education, here's the impact on you. It's good to know what exactly we need. And I get concerned the same way that you do when I see enrollment declining. And I think about, what's the one biggest thing we can do to stabilize and increase enrollment? And I think it is to be excellent. And you all have done so much work to make this district excellent. It's just they're very thoughtfully constructed in terms of staffing strategies, using data to meet the needs of kids, thinking about social emotional learning, feelings of belonging. And I think that is, that is a real differentiator potentially of this community and this district from many others. And I think if we, I wouldn't do it quite as dramatically as Jim did, but if we start to sort of fall off of that, we lose our, competitive edge. If I'm a family trying to move to Vermont or just within Vermont, and I care about my kids and education, I want to be part of this district. And so I want us to think through that lens with a long-term view. So that's the big heavy stuff. I also happen to coach middle school track and field here in this district, which I also love and care deeply about. And I know that you are about to discuss whether or not to uncommit the committed fund balance that had been dedicated towards renovating the track. And I think that there is a reasonable position to fall back to, given all the other things that we as a district are facing. I talk about this facility as a neglected facility because it's been, we had a state championship high school track program for decades, as I understand it, back in the day before my time. Then it evaporated and the track fell into disrepair. We gave away or sold equipment. And so now we have a track that survived the flood remarkably well. So it's a resilient facility already. But we don't have any equipment, and the curb that defines inside the track was viable enough 2 years ago that I could mark it, from where the starts and the staggers and things like that are, and reliably come back the next year and not have to measure that again with a wheel. That curb is gone, or almost entirely gone. So there are some, I've made the analogy before, if our auditorium were in that condition, we would maintain it. And I just want us to maintain the facility that we've got. So let's bring it back up, if possible, to safe, working, reliable condition that doesn't take hundreds of hours of parent volunteer time to make it viable for competition. And let's equip that facility and that team, those teams, with, a discus cage that protects people from getting hit by a discus, hurdles, a pole vault equipment, and just sitting here this evening, equipment wise, that looks like that's about $45,000. And then, replacing the curb on the inside of the track, taking care of the condition of the track, making sure that weeds aren't growing there constantly, et cetera. Those are some facilities, installation things that might be more expensive, and I can try to meet with Andrew about that. But I think as a fallback position from committing $1.9 million, okay, if we acknowledge that we're not going to get, we couldn't find a contractor to build a new track for that price on the timeline that we wanted. Okay, so if that's not going to happen, what can we do that is, and this is not operating costs, right? This is not me wishing to take funds from Allison's position. This is an investment in a facility that will last for decades if we can. And so I think if we can do that, then we are in one other modest way being excellent for our community and our students. I had a parent of an athlete write me back the email saying that was track athlete thought, well, as long as we have access to U32, I'm not sure we really need to care for our track. And my disagreement with that idea is that when we have 70 to 80 middle school track athletes who want to train every day, they can get from the middle school to the high school by walking safely on sidewalks in 20 minutes and be prepared for practice at a facility that is not well equipped right now. As soon as I place practice at U32 to use what is no doubt an excellent facility, I lose as many as half or more of those students because of transportation issues. And so in terms of, I love track and field because it's accessible. It's anyone can participate and increase their performance and experience success and build community. And so by taking care of what's already ours, we can keep that an accessible, low barrier athletic program. So I realize that the main show tonight is about the overall school budget of $32 million, which we absolutely should invest in our students. Just a bid for, let's preserve some space for our facilities to be care about. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good, thanks, Nathan. Anyone else in the room? So we have at least one person on the screen.
There's a hand on the.
Oh, yeah, and I see one person who wants to speak. Anyone else online? Anyone else in the room?
Looks like 2 online, Jim.
Where's the second one? Oh, okay. Physically. Yeah, let's start with the person with the actual Craig Bauer, and then I'm not seeing a name under the person who's waving, but we see you. Craig? And you
thank you.
Even though we just said your name about twice.
Well, thank you, Jim. My name is Craig Bauer. I have 4 students in the district. I have 4 kids. They're all students in the district. 3 of them go to Roxbury Elementary. We moved here specifically for a small school setting, and for our kids to thrive in that small school setting. So to hear you all talk about not changing the size of classrooms, I applaud you for that at the other schools. So thank you for bringing that up. The thing that concerns myself and my wife as well, I don't hear us talking more about math, reading, writing. I hear the social emotional stuff. Yes, I understand that, but it does seem like that is highly weighted compared to math, history. These are things that my family values and that we value, and I know our Roxbury community for sure values. And there are very few of us that can speak, that can talk to these sorts of things. And I know there was a member of our community that spoke at one of the board meetings last time, and she was very emotional about it. And I just had to reach out to her and say, it's okay to feel the way we're feeling when we're feeling so secluded in a lot of ways. And I know our students are feeling that way too. When they do integrate into the Montpelier area. Rhett, Kristen, thank you guys for everything that you do. Rhett, I have heard you speak of the weight that you hold. I want you to understand you do not have to hold that weight. I know we all know how much you care. And I just really appreciate you very much, my friend. I love this community so much. I love the school system. I don't appreciate necessarily though what we're valuing right now as a school system, or how we're talking about a track situation when we're talking about our kids. I'm looking at a high schooler on the screen right now who's a part of this board meeting that's who we should be really focused on. In general, are just these kids and setting them up for success. Does a track situation do that? Sure, I understand that, but we're not the Midwest. Athletics bring money into the schools in the Midwest. It does not here. We just have to face that fact. And I know I'm over my time, but I do feel like I needed to say something along the lines of math, writing, reading, history. Those mean a lot to me and my family. Thank you guys, though. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. Appreciate it as well. And then, yes, Nancy Bruce. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Board members for that's before you. It's like the ultimate Rubik's Cube of like, how do we pull this all together? And I really deeply appreciate all your time and energy doing this for our students and our families here in Montpelier. And I would like to comment on a couple of things that in terms of enrollment, getting families in. I don't know how that's going to happen when the people that are here can barely afford to even stay here, being middle class and lower middle class. So there's no housing. So I'm not sure where the logic of increasing enrollment foreign students. I'd love to get more information about that. And I really appreciate what Morgan said about class size and the needs of the students. I'm a former public school teacher, and I totally get it. Like the need, the pressure on our families is gigantic, and the issues are huge. And I don't in any way want to compromise, as our previous spokesperson said, about the elemental pieces of academic learning. I don't think, I guess what I would like to hear from you is looking at, I'm sorry, the track survived the flood. Maybe it'll survive another 50 years. And I understand that there's so much that we want for our children, but there's like not enough money to cover all these ideas. And for me, I want to come back to academics and the most important essential things. And I asked the board to, I haven't heard much, and I've tried to be in all the meetings and distracted by kids here, but I hear about cutting costs of teachers, but I haven't heard about all the extracurricular activities, sports, those salaries, those benefits. of those amazing, wonderful people that we love and appreciate, what piece does that have to add to our equation as we try to figure this out? And I apologize if you already talked about that. But that's all I have to say. And again, thank you. You guys are amazing. Thank you for serving this community and all that you're doing with your time.
No, thank you, Nancy. Really appreciate it. Anyone else online? Those can return. Nope. Okay, great. Thank you everyone for a very thoughtful comment. The agenda.
Yeah.
is
I think the next thing is the track.
So I thought too.
It's the track.
Yeah, so next, so what guidance do you need on the budget? Got some,
We can hear you.
I was asking her what guidance she needed on the budget.
We will bring back the second draft next week, taking into new numbers and any feedback we heard. We don't, so no, we don't need any more guidance.
Okay, perfect. That's not got my thing to show up. So next is a discussion as come up before. Potential action regarding the assigned funds. As you know, we assigned $1.9 million for the track. I suggested in the last meeting, and Miriam actually suggested before I did at a previous meeting, that just given the uncertainty over the next few years and how we might want to use those funds, that the current assignment is not, I think, really an accurate intention of the board's thoughts. I do want to say, I think everyone on the board who voted for the track still supports the idea of a track. We're just in a different financial situation with different uncertainties. If we do vote to unassign the track, that does not mean that we will never build the track. It does not mean that we will not do at some point the type of upgrades that have been suggested. Obviously, we want a safe facility. But I think right now, as we envisioned that when we passed it, is not how we're envisioning the use of those funds. If for no other reason that we don't have a clear vision of the use of those funds, and I think having to be assigned to the track is something that keeps coming up and is not necessarily helpful for the framing of how those funds are currently being viewed by the board. And another thing we have going on that I think will inform just potential expenditures with those funds around our grounds in general is we have a facilities report. I mean, the budget has kind of eclipsed the concerns that we had a few months ago about the flooding, but we are going to get a report on our facilities, including suggestions about how these grounds should best be used going forward. And I think that's also going to inform what we might want to do with those funds. So I suggested at the last meeting just unencumbering those funds so they don't have a designation, so people aren't confused. Again, that doesn't mean that we're retreating from any ideas long-term. It doesn't mean that we're reassigning those funds any place. We're just right now, as we envision those funds being used for a track, that track project is probably not something that we would not need to totally revisit and rediscuss before we move forward again. And I think unassigning the funds reflects more, I think, where we're at with it, which is we want these funds available to help guide the district through the next 5 years as adeptly as possible. And again, that could mean some sort of track modification. If we get great news from the legislature and some other things change, it could mean that we could revisit that project and reassign to that project. So that's my proposal. And I'd love to hear any thoughts Jill.
I was just wondering if we knew what our overall athletics or athletics and extracurricular activities budget is. And the reason I'm asking is the things that folks have suggested as ways to like at least literally use the track safely seem pretty reasonable. I think it's really unfortunate that because we had this great momentum about the track, that it has become kind of a punching bag for a lot of things, but having the curb fixed and the hurdles replaced and a safety net for shot put, javelin, discus seem like they would be part of an athletics budget and shouldn't even, again, continue to be kind of a punching bag and lightning rod in public meetings when there's lots of other athletics. And my kid's one of the mass kids, like there's lots of things we do. And I just think I would really like to support something from our athletics budget to at least provide the minimum, because I don't agree with the characterization that it's track versus students. It's very much track is students, and it's actually a huge number of our students.
Yes.
And it's probably one of the least expensive and most inclusive outdoor athletic opportunities that kids have. So I fundamentally disagree that it's not a specific investment to invest in the track. I completely agree and understand we're in a different financial spot. So I definitely think we do need to reassign the 1.9 million. And I think it seems very reasonable to have some of our athletics budget, which pays for uniforms and busing and all these other things, could do the minimum piece for something that's used by so many kids. So whatever that laundry list is to make it safe seems very reasonable and modest as part of, and also other athletic teams use that area as well. And I've also heard, a track is actually a pretty great use of a floodplain. It's like a parking lot. It's not great, but it works in a flood. So I'm really sorry that the track has become this public lightning rod when it really, I don't think it's necessary. And it's ignoring a whole other piece of the experience that students have here that's not getting that same level of scrutiny.
Jill, you can see on slide 21 of the budget presentation, co-curriculars athletics. You can see the past 2 years and the proposed number.
Which slide, sorry?
And before I hand it to Jake, I want to build on that. I mean, the idea that extracurriculars is a distraction from our students is one of the most absurd concepts out there. I mean, think about your own high school experience. Yes, academics were super important, but some of your biggest growth experiences, some of your biggest formations of identity, some of your biggest life learning experiences, some of your biggest friendship building experiences, some of your biggest confidence building experiences oftentimes came from extracurricular activities, the play you were in, the sport you were in, that you grew and you pushed yourself and you learned how teamwork works and all of those life lessons. If you're, I have very little patience for people who thinks extracurriculars is distracting from students. It can be some of the most meaningful experiences our kids have. And it's a very small portion of our budget. It would be an absolute shame if we robbed kids of some of these really life-changing opportunities and life-building opportunities.
Well, Jim, to add on that, at MHS and MSMS here, we don't call them extracurriculars because they're not extra, they're co-curriculars. They are part of our program and part of what we offer students. And as the superintendent, I would never support a place that did not include that. It's just not something that's even feasible in my mind.
And not only are they very inexpensive, but they're supported by, and this brings the whole community in and kids learn from the community members. So many of the coaches, so many of the people who make the plays possible, who make our music productions possible, are basically volunteer community members who give hours and hours and hours for, like a $1,200 stipend or something. It is such a valuable experience for the community and for the students.
They're a teacher.
Or they're a teacher who's giving time.
Great way for us to interact with the teacher outside of the classroom.
Absolutely. Jake and then Scott.
I was just going to say that if kids are going to be using it, I definitely want it to be safe and adequate. And ask, have we recently gotten an estimate on how much it would cost to bring it up to to usability?
No.
Andrew could give you.
You said your question was how much, maybe usable? That was that
Or whatever term you want to use to bring it up.
That's the definition. That's the question. What is that? What is that level? You know, it's been used the way it is for however many years. Since 20 years ago, they started allowing trucks to drive on it, which I think you spoke to earlier. That was really turning point. So it's not an answer I can give you right here. It's not. It's a conversation of where do we bring it? What are our priorities? Some of the ideas that have been brought up are great. Where do we store it? So it's not just the hurdles. It's the rack for the hurdles. It's the machine to hurl the hurdles. It's the storage to put the hurdles in. Kind of thing. So it's not an easy. Here's the number. There's certain incremental improvements with that. Absolutely.
And would that be like facilities subcommittee who might have that conversation about the work that we would want to do?
It could very well be. Jim and I are meeting next Friday to talk about this very thing. I think that the board could make a decision around, you know, if you're thinking about the fund balance money, you could say reserve $350,000 for track improvements and maintenance. Andrew is correct. We can't store hurdles in the basement anymore. So where are we going to put it? Like that's a big conversation for the board to consider. And in the beginning of the process of the track, we had in there a storage unit, which was largely poo-pooed by the community because it was seen as superfluous. So that is a reality. Like Andrew's not just speaking, that is a reality. So if we want to do those kind of equipment and upgrades, we need to find also a storage place for that equipment that we currently do not have. I think the safety questions, I think that's actually the thing that we need the actual number on. What do we need to do to make that surface safe?
Yeah.
For our athletes and our community members who use it every single day. So that's a different question that we don't have an answer to right now. And I don't even know what an estimate would be because I'm not a track athlete myself. And so I'd have to talk to some experts and Andrew'd have to talk to some experts to find out what exactly we're talking about there.
Andrew, did your hand shoot up?
Yeah, I mean, and I would say it needs to be in the context of the athletics in general, because there were 300 people, 400 people watching a basketball game that might say, hey, the scoreboards that the bulbs go out every year that we don't really know what the score is because the scoreboards are 30 years old. Probably want to weigh in on where athletic comes to be. That's just my decision.
Scott, did you want to get in?
So yeah, 5% of the overall, 5% of what is spent on curricular is what's spent on co-curricular. So it's a drop in the bucket compared to what general education is. And it is, as Jim so eloquently shared, like what so many people value from their high school experience and what colleges value when recruiting. So yeah, it's not wise to think of cutting co-curriculars when looking at our overall budget. I have a question, and I wasn't around for the encumbrance of the track money from the fund balance, but why would that project not be part of the capital plan? I guess is my question. And then I think I'm just going to make a motion to unencumber the funds that were set aside for the track project.
Yeah, and I
can hold that though. I have some questions too.
You can go into discussion. Somebody can. You can second it and go into discussion. Sorry, I was speaking out of turn.
I'll second it just to get the issue on the table and then we can keep discussion.
Okay. Discussion.
Should we answer Scott's questions?
Sure.
Can you was it only the one about like why wouldn't it go?
Yeah, but
was that your only question?
The main question that I had was how did the track project ever be taken out of the capital plan in the first place?
It was never the part of the capital plan.
Yeah.
So what happened, 2 years ago, Jim, 3 years ago? We recognized that we had a very large fund balance and we had ESSER funding coming in that could pay for some other renovation work that we were thinking about using the fund balance for. And because of the fund balance and its largeness, we started thinking about larger one-time projects that we could spend down some of that fund balance around. And quite honestly, I came to Jim and said, I think the track is the place to do it because that's the place that needs the most work at the high school level facility. And that's where the discussion started because we had such a large fund balance and needed to start spending that down. There is a board meeting I can find for you that talks about how the fund balance became so large because it was before your time on the board if you're interested in that. I don't have the date on the top of my head.
No, that part is not as important for me at this point. I guess the question is, why wouldn't we consider the track project alongside any other capital projects for the district?
I think that's what the board has been doing, except not through the capital fund.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the capital fund is kind of more of a maintenance fund, those projects that are significant but not huge. This is a larger project. This is like the renovation of the auditorium that we did a while back. This is more like on the scale of like the UES playground. It's a major project that needs more than the $250,000 that we ask out of the capital fund.
So one other important detail there is that the conversation did get sparked
by students.
Further back by students who actually put together a presentation as part of a class to advocate that the board make more investment in the track facility to support the growing number of students participating in track and field. So it is a really beautiful example of how co-curriculars work with our curriculars. And I would say that if and when it gets to a place where it's really just about maintaining it, then yeah, it makes sense that it would be part of a capital plan. But given that we knew that the price tag was going to be so significant if what we wanted to do was what we had voted to do about a year ago at this point, it's like Jim said, more than the $250,000 that we essentially spend out of capital fund every year.
Miriam.
Nice and loud, Miriam. Nice and loud.
At the risk of being overly repetitive, I want to add to what everyone's saying and just add my own experience to the importance of the track. I mean, I've been doing track since I was in 5th grade with Nathan when we had like 10 people. And I think I was one of the youngest ones there and it was a great time. And I have some really weird memories of that, but it was a good time. And since then, running has become a really big part of my life. I've made some of my most important and most meaningful connections through running, through my sports. Struggling with my mental health, with the immense stress of being a high schooler. Running is something that's always helped me cope with that. And I know that the same thing is true for the other people who run. And I know that that's not a small number of people, especially compared to the small size of these schools. And also I've done a lot of workouts on that track in the past year. And it's not just like anecdotally, it's disappointing and it's kind of embarrassing. Like when I talk to people from other schools, our track is sort of a joke at this point, and it shouldn't be all around. We have very good athletics. Our track team is pretty good. That track is just
sad.
a problem. I don't know what to say. It's like, I mean, Spalding's got a dirt track. But their track isn't an embarrassment because at least they've got like pole vault. I don't know. So I can't make a motion because I'm a non-voting member and I really, really don't understand how the rules of order work anyway. No, you got it. That's it.
Yeah.
You're not voting.
But I do want to request that either tonight
either we do this tonight or we put this on the agenda for some time soon in the future, that we allocate some amount of money to make that track functional and safe and a bit less sad. It's really important to a lot of people.
Lynn.
Thank you. So I have a couple questions. I believe that our kids, we can't have any track meets here, so every time we normally would have a home game, we have to go somewhere else. Is that correct?
We basically have to use
bus the kids
U32.
somewhere.
Yeah, like at the last, I mean, Nathan has it better, but the last track meet we hosted last year was at U32. And I'll also, like, just building on your point about, can we just use U32 built this track so U32 could use it. I mean, like, they're being very generous. They've been extremely generous with us in terms of giving it time, but also, I mean, not does it influence transportation, it also influences the time. It oftentimes will, to the extent that people have to practice on that track, it's oftentimes after the U32 is practiced, so that it becomes a very late practice that gets into dinner time that, makes it harder for families. And I'll let Nathan speak.
That is the ineffable mystery.
Yeah.
We ask parents to leave work with hopefully a minivan and pick up the middle school, load them in, transport them to U32, and then a different group of parents would come pick them up and get them.
And who hopefully have clean driving records and are swear safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it just, Lynn, we have held competitions at our track, and I chose not to do that last year. When we do that, I kid you not, it's about a day and a half of probably 10 or 12 parents, a bunch of the middle school and high school team. We literally pull weeds along the curb. We rake leaf litter off the track because it's not well maintained. We use the measuring wheel and we walk. I walk the track backwards 5 times, one time per lane to figure out where the start for the 200 meters should be for the second lane and for the third lane. And then we have teams of kids with a string and the tool that sprays paint to mark lines. We have water sprayers because paint sticks better when the track is damp. I drive my minivan to Spalding after making a connection with the Spalding coach. I borrow the other Spalding coach's trailer. We load all the Spalding High School hurdles onto the trailer, drive it to our track, set up the hurdles, thank them profusely, then do that thing in reverse. Tom Allen, who's a tremendous staff person, takes the MRPS trailer down to Northfield and borrows their high jump. This used to be the case. We now have a high jump pit. Borrows their high jump pits, brings those up here for a competition. So you're starting to get an idea of the sort of lift it took to host a home meet. And we did that twice a season for at least 2 years. And last year, we do have a good relationship with U32. And so I said, okay, it's so much, so we asked U32 if we could host there, but then we're negotiating with them, we're on schedule. They're concerned about liability, a bunch of their staff have to be present because it's not our facility. And I love collaboration. And I think that the answer is yes. And it's just a question of how can we do it. But there's a stamina, there's a fatigue factor with how often can we do that and how often can we go to that well with our parents. I would love it if those parents use that same esprit de corps in other ways to support our program.
And do we compensate U32 for using the track?
I do not believe that we pay to use the facility.
And what we pay for busing?
When we have a bus. Yeah, that's right. So, if we didn't hold 2 meets last year and the year before, our competition season in outdoor track and field for middle school would have been, it's not like there were some other meets we could have gone to on those times, right? So the kids, that's like a 30% loss of their competition for the year if we don't do that. And the service we provide to other teams in this region of the state is tremendous because they either don't have facilities or they don't have the core of volunteers to put on a meeting that's well run. And it's been experienced.
I still have a question.
Oh, sorry. Should I stay here?
I don't know. Who can answer these? One of them is about our budget though, and that is, what, is there enough included in the line item for, extracurricular and athletics to, do improvements to the track this year?
No.
Is that something that?
No, that is budgeted money. So no, that is not inclusive of any improvements to the track. What the board could do is unencumber the funds today, put it back in our savings account. That's essentially what you'd be doing, right? Is putting it in our savings account. Andrew and I can work with our track coaches and aficionados to find, to define safety and what needs to happen for that track, get an amount for it, and then come back to the board and say, we need this amount for the work on the track or for equipment or storage shed or whatever. We could do that over the course of the, budget.
Yeah.
Also, the issue of the floodplain, and how much we invest in that. I mean, I would like to do improvements to the track, like, and at the same time, I'm thinking, okay, how much, what are we thinking of doing? Because it may get flooded again. And if we think about a storage building, where would that go? Because our property's in a floodplain, right? If we wanted to store.
So those would be all conversations that we'd be having. Our property isn't all in the floodplain. So some of it, a lot of it is, but it's not all there. And as been pointing out, think about the parts of our facility that survived the flood and was under a considerable amount of water. The track, the field in the center of it, our parking lot, all of these things survived pretty well. We make better improvements to the track. It's gonna survive. If we actually did the track, it would survive better, quite honestly, with the water coming off of it, because that's how that particular area is designed. It's designed for water to fall off of it. It has pathways around it for the water to recede quickly. That's how that area, that's why that field looks so beautiful. And the field didn't have any significant damage to it. Whereas the softball field over here did, because it's not designed that way, right? It was like a clay bathtub. This is not. This is designed in a specific way so that so it can be resilient to weather.
That's all.
Emma?
I just want to elevate what Miriam is asking for, and I hope that we can try to make something like that happen tonight, actually, and maybe alter the motion to unencumber. I mean, I know it's arbitrary, but right now, even the amount that's designated for the track is fairly arbitrary based on the numbers that we got back from the proposals. So maybe like unencumber 1.5 million and keep 400,000, get some better numbers and figure it out. But I would like to sort of signal the commitment that we made. I've been on the board for 3.5 years, and I can count on one hand the number of times that we've had students come to us and ask us for something. And they've come to us over and over and over again, just sort of echoing, their desire to have this facility improved. And it's really upsetting. And we're in just upsetting budgetary times. Like, that's just all there is to it. There's not a lot of good news happening right now. But it's really upsetting to not be able to give them the track that we hoped to give them. But I think that I would like to signal to them that we are committed to giving them at least a facility that feels safe, that they're not going to fall off the edge of, that has all of the equipment that they need to do the different events. So I would like to urge other board members to potentially amend the motion.
I think the procedural way in my Robert's rules were never great in the first place. I think we have one of two courses for that. Scott can either amend his motion, or we can vote on Scott's motion, vote it down, and then have someone remotion.
Yeah,
Or Scott can withdraw his motion.
A motion to encumber $400,000.
or unencumber 1.5? Does it, doesn't matter?
I don't think it
just
matters.
needs a motion.
It just means, okay.
You have a motion on the table is the point.
Okay, so why do we do that? Why don't we vote on Scott's motion and then reassign $400,000
I just heard a
to the track?
withdrawal.
Scott can withdraw.
Oh, you
You
can't.
want to withdraw you want to withdraw? Okay,
Also had his hand up earlier.
Jake, sorry.
This is sort of predates Scott's motion, but like, why are we doing anything right now on the track? We don't need the money.
Because I think there's still a conversation in the community that we're going to spend $2 million on a track. And I don't think that's accurate. And I think we may spend $200,000 to $300,000 on an update in the near future. Or, I mean, we are not going to spend $2 million on a track in the next few years, just given where we're at. And in most, without some change, that money is probably going to go elsewhere. So my feeling is let's have the money be more accurately assigned to kind of where the board is now. I mean, we could vote the motion down and keep it to the track. It's something that keeps popping up. And with, I think people justifiably already upset about where their taxes are going. There's, and two, people confused about why. I think if we can eliminate a story out there that their taxes are going up because we're hell bent on spending $2 million on a track regardless, it's easier to tell people that no, we are not thinking about that money in that light right now, given our tax situation, even though we're still supportive of the track, if we have that money assigned to the track. Yeah.
Well, and just to build off of that, Miriam made a point a couple of meetings ago is it's just not, it's not honest.
Yeah.
If we're not actually thinking we're gonna use the money for the track, then it is also in the reverse, putting out a false promise to those who
Yes.
hope we are going to use it that way, if we're not actually intending to.
Exactly. It's confusing all around. And I think it would be a more accurate representation if I think where the consensus of the board is, we don't know what we're going to spend that $1.5 million on because we don't know what the next few years brings. We realize that we have a great track program. We wanted to really build a track that I think that track program deserves. We are not in the position to do that now, but we can certainly do something. And let's set aside some funds to do something to make the track safe, to make it better. But let's not either give the false impression that that money is going to be spent on the track regardless of where taxes go. And let's not also give the impression to, the kids that are coming up through the track and, maybe in 6th grade and be like, well, I'm going to have a great track when I'm in 9th grade. That's not going to be the case, or it's probably not going to be the case, or at least not the track that we originally envisioned building. Kristen and then Jill. And
Could
I
we
just
also-
want to be cognizant that it's like
Yep.
9:05.
Could we also signal in our meeting summary and or our minutes that the context of, say, if there is a $400,000 encumbrance to kind of get the track to a
Yeah.
place of safe standard, the board is directing, or advising administration to move ahead with a process to do an assessment, that includes the input of students and our incredible coaches. I mean, my heart is just overwhelmed by the amount of time and effort and the opportunity that you are creating for our students. I just want to deeply thank you. So I just wonder if within our summary and in our minutes, we can specifically, make a nod to that we are moving ahead with a process around assessment and to make a more responsible expenditure on the track.
Conservative.
Yeah.
What did I say?
You said responsible. I'm just editorializing. Conservative investment.
Yeah.
Sure.
More conservative.
Sure.
Can
Jill.
I go real quick? I'm really bothered by a clarification we heard a couple minutes ago that there is no money to do anything to the track in either the athletics or at the buildings and grounds. I think if parents were expected to go in and clean up the basketball court for kids to play basketball, or the kids were painting the lines, I think there would be complaints. So I don't understand why not only are we not providing a safe track, doesn't sound like we're spending any money. And I remember the days when the city owned our grounds and that was like the rec department or something. So there was always like this tension. And I'm wondering if maybe this is a holdover of that. I'm wondering if the tennis courts have the same lack of upkeep and the same dependence on volunteers. But I just think it's really imbalanced if you look at the number of kids who participate and that there's nothing that parents have to sweep the track off and it's not safe. If the basketball court wasn't safe, that wouldn't be stood for. So I don't understand why the track isn't at least some minimal maintenance or safety as part of our athletics or our buildings budget. And maybe it is, but that's what I'm concerned about now. It shouldn't be.
You're gonna redo it.
Yeah.
So-
Okay.
We're gonna do a brand new one. So,
Okay.
that's why there wasn't money for immediate upgrades, because the original plan was that it was, as soon as the snow melted, it was gonna start, the work was gonna start on it.
Okay.
Like, we weren't gonna use it this season at all, because it was supposed to get started.
Thank you. That makes sense.
And there may be minimal things. I don't know exactly how that co-curriculars is. I mean, it's obviously the salaries that we pay coaches and all that kind of stuff. And there's always uniforms and all of that piece in there. So for me to say there's nothing in there for the track is not accurate. I just don't know exactly how much for what costs.
Thank you.
So I hear Scott withdrawing his motion. I think I hear pretty clear communication from the board to Andrew and Libby that at some point, it doesn't have to be immediate, because I know we have things to do with holidays coming up. Some sort of an assessment of what a fix would look like that would bring our existing track up to a usable and less embarrassing position.
Safe.
And safe. Well, I'm usable, I'm encompassing safe as part of that. And then I'm hearing that there's a desire for someone, maybe Scott again, to make a motion to unencumber 1.5 million and leave $400,000 as a set aside for future work
Track
renovations,
program.
upgrades to the track. With the idea that we could move that number slightly in either direction. Andrew, you're twitching.
And this is, you're trying to, that number is a big number.
Yeah.
That's a lot. I can't imagine, given what we're working with, that we could ever spend $400,000. But I think that number is very large. So if there's a mechanism to.
We can always bring it down. I mean,
We're not like forcing you to spend that much money. We're just-
but it takes roughly 75% of the current money, and it puts it into a different category. And I know my math was a perfect, Jake. You're gonna correct me.
And say one short.
Yes.
So when we get these estimates, it would be great to have like a little bit of an option table, like safe and usable, it's basic. And then I think Nathan is saying you'd like to have meets there, which seems to me like sort of the pinnacle. So the range would be good to know.
We don't have a motion on the table right now.
And
Yeah.
it's very tricky with,
Yeah.
I find it a little tricky, like, I don't want to do too many repairs if there's still a hope of replacing the track. Like, so there's sort of this balance of like, I don't want to say no within the next 5 years, we definitely will not.
No,
But
I don't think
and
we
so-
have to. And I at like 9-10, I think we're at a good spot where we can have a conversation about this later.
Do you want to make the motion? I can make the motion?
Yes.
I move to unencumber $1.5 million of the track earmark, leaving $400,000 for track program and facility improvements.
Second.
Since we have a motion, we have to have an opportunity for further discussion.
I thought someone did an estimate, but
I just want to appreciate the U32 track team that came out a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
That blew my mind. The whole U32 track team came and they advocated for their neighbors to have a facility that was close to theirs. And it was just incredibly moving, and all the kids that have come out, the little boy that said that there were rocks in their knees, I can never forget that.
No, thank you. And thank you to everyone who's continued to advocate for this and been part of all of our co-curricular programs. They're all extremely valuable. And I think the passion we see around it reflects that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you all. Motion to adjourn,
So moved.
second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, everyone. This is great work. It's been a tough budget season and I really appreciate the thoughtfulness.
We're meeting in a row.